The Council's Judgment. The Galactic Council chamber stretched toward infinity, its crystalline walls catching and refracting light from 1,000 different suns. Representatives from across the known galaxy filled the ascending tiers, their alien forms creating a tapestry of colors and shapes that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. At the chamber's heart, bound by crackling energy chains that hummed with raw power, stood Vor. The dragon's silver-black scales caught the chamber's ethereal glow, each one seeming to hold its own inner fire. His golden eyes swept across the assembled beings with undisguised contempt, wings folded tight against his massive frame despite the restraints. Vor of the ancient flame, Chancellor Rayon's voice echoed through the vast space, amplified by the chamber's perfect acoustics. The Chancellor's elongated form leaned forward from the highest tier, his pale features carved from centuries of political maneuvering. You stand accused of acts of terrorism against 17 civilized worlds, destruction of 3 orbital stations, and the murder of countless innocents. A growl rumbled deep in Vor's chest, the sound making several council members shift nervously in their seats. Innocents? His voice carried the weight of molten rock. You speak of the soldiers who burned my people's nesting grounds. The fleets that hunted dragon young for sport. Your people violated the Galactic Accords, Rayon continued, unmoved. They refused to submit to lawful authority, hoarded resources that belonged to the greater galactic community, and posed a threat to civilized space. We defended ourselves. Vor's roar shook dust from the ancient walls. For 3,000 years, my kind served as guardians of the Outer Rim. We asked for nothing but the right to exist in peace. Your civilized races repaid us with genocide. The chamber fell silent except for the subtle hum of the energy restraints. Chancellor Rayon's expression remained carved from stone as he delivered the Council's verdict. For your crimes against galactic peace and security, you are sentenced to permanent exile on Terran, the dead world beyond the Rim. Any attempt to leave will result in immediate termination. The chains tightened, energy crackling brighter as they prepared for the teleportation sequence. Vor's final words echoed through the chamber as reality bent around him. You fear what you cannot control, but remember this, Chancellor, exiled does not mean forgotten. The day will come when you'll need what you've cast away. With a flash of blinding light, the last dragon vanished from civilized space, leaving only the lingering scent of ozone and the uncomfortable silence of beings who wondered if they had just made a terrible mistake. The crash. 5 long years had passed since Vor's exile to Terran, a world that seemed designed by the universe itself as a prison. The planet's surface stretched endlessly in all directions, jagged obsidian peaks rising from plains of volcanic glass, perpetually shrouded in storms that lashed the landscape with acid rain and howling winds. Vor had carved himself a shelter in the largest mountain he could find, using his flame breath to hollow out chambers deep within the volcanic rock. The solitude had changed him. Where once his scales had gleamed like polished metal, they now bore the dull patina of neglect. His golden eyes, once bright with fury, had dimmed to the color of old amber. He had learned to survive on the sparse creatures that occasionally wandered into his territory, silicon-based life forms that tasted like ash and provided little satisfaction. Most days, he simply lay in his cavern, watching the storms rage outside and remembering better times when his people soared through nebulae and sang to the stars. It was during one such storm that the ship fell from the sky. Vor heard it first, a screaming whistle that cut through the wind's howl, different from the usual meteor showers that peppered Terran's surface. He emerged from his shelter just in time to see a small vessel, clearly not built for atmospheric entry, tumbling through the toxic clouds. It struck the obsidian plain about a mile from his mountain with the sound of a world breaking. For several minutes, Vor simply watched the wreckage burn. Ships had crashed on Terran before, smugglers trying to use the dead world as a way station, or occasionally a lost explorer. He had investigated the first few, but had always found only corpses or empty hulls. The galaxy had nothing left to offer him. But something made him move this time. Perhaps it was the way the ship's hull gleamed despite the damage, suggesting it was recently built. Perhaps it was simple curiosity born from years of mind-numbing isolation. Or perhaps it was the sound that reached his ears as he approached, a sound he had not heard in 5 years. Crying. Vor's massive head lowered as he investigated the wreckage. The ship had been a civilian transport, its hull cracked open like an egg. Emergency oxygen was still hissing from ruptured tanks, and the acrid smell of melted electronics filled the air. But there, in what had once been the passenger compartment, trapped beneath a beam that would have been immovable to any normal rescuer, was a small human child. The girl couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Her dark hair was matted with blood from a cut on her forehead, and her wide brown eyes stared up at him with a mixture of terror and desperate hope. She wore the simple clothes of a colony child, practical fabrics in earth tones, now torn and stained. "Help," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. "Please help me." Vor hesitated. His people had been hunted to extinction by humans and their allies. Every instinct told him to walk away, to let fate take its course. But looking into those frightened eyes, he saw something that stopped him cold. She wasn't looking at him like he was a monster. She was looking at him like he was her only hope. Carefully, more gently than he had moved in years, Vor extended one massive claw and lifted the beam that pinned her. The girl scrambled free, crying out as she put weight on what was clearly a broken ankle. Without thinking, Vor scooped her up in his claws, cradling her small form against his chest as he had once cradled dragon young. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softer than it had been in years. "Alara," she whispered, clinging to his scales despite her fear. "My parents, the ship." Vor looked back at the wreckage, his enhanced senses detecting no other life signs. The girl was alone, orphaned by whatever disaster had brought her to this forsaken world. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "But you're safe now. I won't let anything hurt you." As he carried her through the storm toward his mountain shelter, Vor felt something he had thought dead forever stirring in his chest. For the first time in 5 years, he had a purpose that went beyond mere survival. He had someone to protect. Part 3, Bonds Forged in Fire. 3 months had transformed both the dragon and the child in ways neither could have imagined. Alara's broken ankle had healed, though she still favored it slightly when climbing the rocky passages of Vor's mountain home. Her initial fear of the massive dragon had given way to an easy companionship that would have shocked the Galactic Council members who had condemned Vor as an irredeemable monster. The cavern system had grown too. Using his flame breath with surgical precision, Vor had carved out additional chambers, one perfectly sized for Alara, with smooth walls and carefully regulated temperature. He had even managed to salvage some materials from her crashed ship, creating crude but functional furniture from twisted metal and crystalline deposits. "Tell me about the stars again," Alara said one evening as they shared their evening meal. She sat cross-legged on a flat stone, picking at the cooked meat of a crystal lizard Vor had caught that morning. Despite the alien nature of the food, she had adapted remarkably well to their harsh environment. Vor's golden eyes turned toward the cavern opening, where Terran's 3 small moons were visible through a break in the eternal storms. "Which ones would you like to hear about?" "The Singing Nebula," she said immediately. "Where your people used to fly." A deep warmth filled Vor's chest. Over the months, he had shared stories of his people's history, their ancient cities that floated in the hearts of stars, their songs that could guide ships through hyperspace, their role as protectors of the galaxy's frontier. Stories he had never thought he would tell again. "The melodic nebula," he began, his voice taking on the cadence of an ancient storyteller. "Stretches across 17 light-years of space, its gases singing with harmonics that can be heard from parsecs away. My ancestors discovered that by flying in specific patterns through its currents, they could add their own voices to the song, creating music that could calm space storms or call lost travelers home." "Could you still do it?" Alara asked. "If we ever left here?" The question hung in the air between them. In the months since her arrival, neither had spoken directly about the future. Terran was a prison, its location known only to the council that had exiled Vor. No rescue would come for either of them. "I don't know," Vor admitted. "It has been so long since I sang to the stars." The songs were passed down through generations, learned in the company of other dragons. Alone, I might have forgotten the proper harmonics. Alara set down her meal and stood, walking to where Vor lay coiled near the cavern's center. Without hesitation, she placed her small hand on his massive snout, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "You're not alone anymore," she said firmly. "And I'm a fast learner. Maybe you could teach me to help." Vor felt something shift inside him, like tectonic plates finding a new equilibrium. "Humans cannot sing to the stars, little one. Your voices lack the resonance frequencies." "Then we'll find another way," Alara said with the absolute confidence that only children possess. "We'll figure it out together." That night, as Alara slept in her chamber, Vor found himself doing something he hadn't done since his exile began. He lifted his great head toward the stars visible through the cavern opening and began to sing. The sound that emerged was rusty at first, uncertain after years of disuse. But gradually, the ancient melodies returned to him, songs of protection, of guidance, of hope carried across the void. His voice echoed through the cavern system, rich and deep and achingly beautiful. In her sleep, Alara smiled. Miles away, automated sensors hidden in Terran's upper atmosphere detected the unique frequency signature and transmitted a coded message across the galaxy. The Council had placed those sensors to monitor any attempt at escape, but they also served another purpose. They were listening for exactly what Vor had just done. On the civilized world of Kepler Prime, Chancellor Rayon received the transmission in his private office. His pale features creased into a frown as he studied the frequency analysis. "Impossible," he murmured. "Dragons don't sing unless they have something to protect. Something they care about more than their own lives." Rayon activated his private communication array, sending encrypted messages to his most trusted agents. The dragon was supposed to be broken by now, driven mad by isolation or dead from despair. Instead, the reading suggested he was somehow growing stronger. This development required immediate investigation. Back on Terran, Vor finished his song and settled down to sleep, unaware that his moment of joy had just signed his and Alara's death warrants. But even if he had known, even if he could have seen the strike team already being assembled on the other side of the galaxy, he would have sung anyway. For the first time in 5 years, he had something worth singing about. The hunters arrive. The attack came at dawn, when Terran storms briefly calmed and the first rays of the system's distant sun painted the obsidian plains in shades of gold and crimson. Vor sensed them before they entered the atmosphere, 6 ships in tight formation, their energy signatures unmistakably military. Council enforcement, designed specifically for hunting creatures like him. His enhanced senses caught the subtle distortions in spacetime that preceded their arrival, giving him perhaps 30 seconds of warning. "Alara." His voice boomed through the cavern system. "Get to the deep chamber, now." The girl, now 8 years old and wise beyond her years from their months together, didn't hesitate or ask questions. She had learned to trust Vor's instincts completely. Her bare feet slapped against stone as she ran toward the emergency shelter he had prepared in the mountain's heart. The first energy blast struck the mountain's peak, vaporizing tons of rock and sending a shockwave through the entire structure. Vor felt the heat wash over him as he spread his wings, positioning himself between the outside world and the passage that led to Alara's hiding place. "Vor of the Ancient Flame," a voice boomed from the lead ship's external speakers. "By order of the Galactic Council, you are to submit to immediate termination for violation of your exile terms." Vor's laugh was like rolling thunder. "Violation? I have not left this cursed rock since you cast me here. You have made contact with unauthorized persons and resumed Dragon Song communications. These actions constitute a threat to galactic security." Understanding flooded through Vor like ice water. They had detected his singing, and somehow they knew about Alara. The ships were already moving into attack formation, their weapons charging with the distinctive whine of military-grade plasma cannons. "The child is innocent," Vor called out, his voice carrying across the plain. "She is a castaway, nothing more." Let her go. All witnesses must be eliminated, came the cold reply. Surrender now and her death will be swift. Vor's golden eyes blazed with fury that had been building for over 5 years. No. The word carried the weight of finality, of a decision that would reshape the fate of stars. The first volley of plasma fire lit up the dawn sky like a miniature sun. Vor met it with a stream of dragon flame that turned the air itself into a weapon. Where the two forces met, reality seemed to scream. But Vor had been weakened by years of exile, malnutrition, and isolation. The Council's weapons were designed by beings who had studied his people's biology for decades, created specifically to kill dragons. Each hit that penetrated his defenses sent agony through his massive frame. Still, he fought. For Alara, for the memory of his slaughtered people, for the simple right to exist without apologizing for the space he occupied in the universe. His claws raked across the hull of one ship, tearing through military-grade armor like paper. His tail swept another from the sky, sending it crashing into the obsidian plains in a ball of fire. But there were too many of them, and they were relentless. Energy beams scored across his flanks, opening wounds that bled silver-bright dragon blood onto the black stone. His left wing took a direct hit, the delicate membrane tearing with a sound like worlds breaking. As Vor stumbled, his strength failing, he heard something that made his blood freeze. The sound of a child screaming his name. Vor. Hold on. Alara had emerged from the deep chamber, her small form silhouetted against the cavern opening. In her hands, she held something that made Vor's heart stop, a piece of technology salvaged from her crashed ship, jury-rigged into a makeshift weapon. Alara, no, he roared, but it was too late. The girl had spent months learning from him, watching how he moved, how he fought. She had also spent months studying the wreckage of her ship, understanding its systems with the quick intelligence that had helped her survive on this hostile world. What she held was a distress beacon, modified with crystalline amplifiers she had carved from the cavern walls. When she activated it, it didn't send a call for help. It sent a message. Across the galaxy, on a dozen different worlds, hidden receivers picked up the signal. The message was simple, broadcast on frequencies that had been silent for 5 years. The last dragon lives. He is not the monster they claim. He saved me. Help us. The attacking ships paused, their pilots receiving urgent communications from their commanders. The signal was being detected across Council space, spreading through communication networks faster than they could contain it. But their mission remained unchanged. Vor and the girl both had to die. As the ships moved in for the killing blow, Vor gathered the last of his strength. His golden eyes met Alara's brown ones across the battlefield, and in that moment, a bond deeper than blood, deeper than species, deeper than the cold vacuum of space itself, crystallized into something that would become legend. I love you too, little sister, he whispered, his voice carrying on the wind. Then he spread his wings and prepared to die protecting the only family he had left. But the galaxy had been listening. And some among the stars had very long memories indeed. The reckoning. The first sign that everything had changed came as a shadow falling across Terran's storm-racked sky. The Council attack ships had moved into their final positions, weapons charged and targeting systems locked on both Vor and Alara, when something impossible happened. Space itself seemed to bend and twist, and then they were there, a fleet unlike anything seen in the galaxy for over a century. The lead vessel was a kilometer long, its hull gleaming with the same silver-black sheen as Vor's scales. Ancient dragon ships, thought destroyed in the Great Purge, had emerged from wherever they had been hiding for 5 long years. Council vessels, a voice rumbled across all frequencies, ancient and powerful and absolutely implacable. You are trespassing in protected space. Withdraw immediately. The lead Council ship's commander tried to maintain his authority. This is Chancellor Rayon's direct order. The dragon and the human are to be terminated. The dragon, the voice replied with quiet menace, is under the protection of the last flight. The human child is under the protection of the last flight. You have 30 seconds to leave this system or be removed. Vor, collapsed on the obsidian plane with energy burns across his flanks, stared upward in amazement. He had thought himself the last of his kind, the final dragon in a galaxy that had hunted them to extinction. But the ships above him bore the crystalline formations that had once adorned the greatest nests of his people. They had survived. Somehow, they had endured. The Council ships didn't retreat. Their commander, following Chancellor Rayon's orders to the letter, gave the order to fire on the newcomers. It was the last order he ever gave. The dragon ships moved like living things, twisting through space with an elegance that made the Council vessels look like crude metal boxes by comparison. Their weapons weren't the harsh energy beams favored by most galactic civilizations, they were streams of stellar fire, the same forces that powered suns, controlled and directed with precision that spoke of millions of years of evolution. The battle lasted less than 5 minutes. When it was over, the Council ships were nothing but expanding clouds of superheated gas, and the dragon ships were settling onto Terran's surface like great metallic birds coming home to roost. The largest ship landed closest to where Vor lay wounded. Its hatch opened with a sound like singing crystal, and from within emerged a figure that made Vor's heart stop. She was magnificent, a dragon even larger than himself, her scales a deep emerald that caught and reflected the light of Terran's distant sun. Her golden eyes held wisdom that spanned millennia, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of authority that came from being the last queen of an ancient people. "Hello, cousin," she said gently. "I am Ethera, keeper of the last flight. We heard your song." Behind her came others, dragons Vor had thought dead, survivors who had hidden in the deep spaces between stars, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. They had monitored Council communications, tracked the locations of their scattered people, and when Alara's message had spread across the galaxy, they had finally decided it was time to act. "How?" Vor whispered, struggling to rise despite his wounds. "The same way your people survived the initial purge," Ethera replied. "We hid. We waited. We preserved what we could of our culture and our strength. But we had lost something crucial: hope. Purpose. Until we heard about you, and the human child you protected." Alara, who had been frozen in amazement since the dragon ships appeared, finally found her voice. "You came because of me?" Ethera's great head turned toward the small girl, and her fierce expression softened into something approaching tenderness. "We came because of what you represent, little one. For 5 years, we watched our cousin waste away in exile, becoming a shadow of what he once was. Then you crashed on this dead world, and something wonderful happened." He remembered what it meant to care for someone other than himself. The ancient dragon looked between Vor and Alara, seeing the bond that had formed between them. Dragons are not meant to be alone. We are at our strongest when we have something to protect, someone to love. You gave that back to him, child. And in doing so, you reminded us all why we fight. Over the following hours, as Vor's wounds were tended by dragon healers who had perfected their arts over millennia, Alara learned the truth about the galaxy she had been born into. The Council's civilization was built on the systematic suppression of any species that couldn't be controlled or exploited. The dragons had been only the latest in a long line of peoples who had been branded as threats to galactic peace and eliminated. But the survivors of the last flight had not been idle during their years in hiding. They had studied Council weaknesses, mapped their defensive installations, and most importantly, they had reached out to other suppressed peoples across the galaxy. "The message you sent," Ethera explained to Alara as they prepared to leave Terran forever, "reached more than just us. It reached the Crystalline Collective, who lost their homeworld to Council strip mining. It reached the Void Walkers, who were enslaved to build Council ships. It reached 100 different peoples who have been waiting for someone to light the spark of resistance." Vor, his wings healed and his scales gleaming once more with their old luster, felt something he had never expected to feel again: hope. "What happens now?" he asked. Ethera's smile was sharp as starlight. "Now. Now we return to the galaxy that cast you out, cousin. But not as the broken exile they tried to create. We return as the protectors we were always meant to be, and we remind the Council why our people were feared as well as respected. The dragon ships rose from Terran's surface like a promise of retribution made manifest. As they entered hyperspace, carrying Vor and Alara toward a future that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization, the last dragon placed a gentle claw on his human sister's shoulder. "Are you ready for this?" he asked. Alara, no longer the frightened child who had crashed on a dead world but not yet the legend she would become, looked up at him with eyes that held steel and starfire in equal measure. "We'll face it together," she said simply. "Just like always." And in the depths of space, ancient harmonies began to sing once more, carried on solar winds toward a galaxy that was about to learn the true cost of injustice. The end.